engaging the community since 1970. This is WIS Awareness.
Good morning and thank you for joining us for Awareness. I'm your host, Megan Norman. The process has begun to repeal the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare.
The Obamacare bridge is collapsing and we're sending in a rescue team.
No, for the millions who will lose
Debate is not allowed during a vote. The senator will suspend.
The Republicans have no plan.
It will be in order.
No plan.
And it will be in order.
The Senate and House both have taken the first steps in the repeal process, but it is not without controversy and questions and pushback, mostly from Democrats. Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan has pledged to repeal and replace, which he says would protect Americans, but no replacement plan has been set forth.
Our goal is a truly patient-centered system, which means more options to choose from, lower costs, and greater control over your coverage. And as we work to get there, we will make sure that there is a stable transition period so that people don't have the rug pulled out from under them.
Republicans talk about they're going to repeal and replace. Interesting, alliteratively, but not realistic in terms of what for 6 years they have had a chance to propose an alternative. We've seen nothing, but what we have seen is their cut and run. They want to cut benefits and run. They want to cut savings and run. They want to cut access and run.
The next step involves committees in both chambers writing legislation to directly repeal the ACA, a process that could take weeks. Repealing the Affordable Care Act could have major implications for consumers. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, a partial repeal could increase the number of uninsured Americans to 18 million, and a full repeal could increase the number of uninsured Americans to 32 million within 10 years. Without a replacement plan, overall health care costs would continue to increase and individual premiums could double in some cases. The report does not address employer-based insurance plans, but a repeal could have some effect on those as well. Now, as Republicans get closer to repealing it, President Obama's federal health care law, or Obamacare, has never been more popular. That is according to results from a new national poll. The NBC News Wall Street Journal poll finds 45% of respondents believe the health care law is a good idea. That is the highest percentage since the poll started asking the question back in April of 2009. Half of Americans, 50%, say they have little to no confidence that Republican proposals to replace the law will make things better. Now, what changes could we see immediately? What will a repeal look like? And what kind of impact could Donald Trump's presidency have on our global and local economies? Joining us now, Robert Hartwig, an economist, insurance expert, and USC professor. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Glad to be here, Megan. Thank you.
Let's begin with how the ACA was constructed.
Well, the ACA was the latest effort by yet another presidential administration to try to solve a vexing problem we've had in America really for decades, the problem of the uninsured for the purposes of health. I mean, the Clinton administration tried this in its first term and failed, and as have other administrations in the past. So finally, with President Obama came into office, he had both the House and the Senate behind them. Both were run by Democrats at the time. And he was able to pass through this legislation without a single vote. Now, there were tens of millions of people without health insurance in the United States at that time. Many people viewed it as a crisis. Costs were spiraling out of control. The idea of the plan was to ensure that not only people are covered, but that it's done so in a way that is affordable. So the plan has lived up to billing in the sense that it is reduced by half the proportion of the American population that is without insurance. It was 18% when the act went into place. Today, it's down to about 10% or even 9.5% or so, depending on who you talk to. The question is where will we be a couple years from now when we have a repeal and a potential replacement?
So if positive things are happening as a result of the ACA, then why this push to repeal? What are some of the negatives or some of the major problems?
Right. Now, while the Affordable Care Act is, through opinion polls, has been shown to be never more popular, at the same time, a good proportion of the American public doesn't don't like it. They still don't. They believe that it has reduced their choices, that many people believe that they can no longer have the doctor that they had for many years or visit the hospitals and clinics that they have for many years. They believe that it's become too expensive, that they're paying for benefits that they don't want or need. For instance, should a couple that is 60 years old be compelled to pay for maternity benefits? Or if they're completely healthy, pay for mental health benefits? These are the sorts of things that are required under the plan that have, yes, they have very dramatically pushed up costs in many senses of the term, because the plans that are available through the Affordable Care Act today are more comprehensive than many of the plans that were available through the private market prior to the Affordable Care Act, but they are more comprehensive. And that is part of the reason why we have seen people have fewer choices in terms of doctors, hospitals, and insurance companies on the exchanges. Right here in South Carolina, we are down to just one insurance company offering Affordable Care Act coverages on the exchanges.
Now, when we look at how quickly this repeal process seems to be moving forward, some Americans thinking, well, am I going to lose my coverage tomorrow? When is this really going to go into effect?
And that's a concern that is registered with millions of Americans. We saw a record number of people sign up for the Affordable Care Act coverages in the fourth quarter of 2016. And so, again, we've seen the proportion of the population down to about 10% or so without coverage. Now, that's an achievement for the Affordable Care Act. However, the good news is that while President-elect and soon-to-be President Trump will likely sign something, perhaps some sort of process that will initiate the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, possibly within hours of the inauguration, certainly within days. What we are likely to see is actually stability in the Affordable Care Act. So if you signed up for coverage in late 2016, your coverage will remain intact with no changes throughout 2017. In fact, it's almost guaranteed that your coverage for 2018 will also be virtually identical. Yes, so you should be, there's no way that a full replacement plan is going to not only be ready, but implemented by the time we have open enrollment late in 2017. It's even possible that it will likely be 2020 before we start to see the full effect of the changes in healthcare in the United States be implemented.
Well, is that partially because it's such a complicated process? I mean, it took so long to happen, so making any changes could take just as long.
It's a very complicated and very expensive process. We've already heard Mr. Trump say that there will be healthcare coverage for everyone, that it will be affordable for everyone.
Right.
That's a big promise to make. That's effectively the promise of the Affordable Care Act. So the question is how do you do that at less cost? So the objective of the Democrats was to expand coverage to as many people as possible. And they did that through providing subsidies, by requiring employer mandates, individual mandates, and offering the exchanges to everybody. The objective of the Republicans, I think, is going to be to try to drive down costs in the system and have a more customer-centric approach that offers people more choices than they had in the past. It is a valid criticism of the Affordable Care Act that the options that people have been reduced, and in some cases literally to a choice of one.
How feasible is it to make changes and still have everyone covered based on your expertise?
Well, as an economist, I know that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and one way or the other it's going to have to be paid for. But I do think it is possible to create more incentives in the system for competition, allow insurers to compete to some extent the way that they did prior to the Affordable Care Act. That will mean probably charging people with certain conditions more, but how much more is a question. On the Affordable Care Act today, that's not permissible at all. An insurance company essentially cannot differentiate for any reason whatsoever. And that's different from all other forms of insurance. And so what that led to with the Affordable Care Act is very large numbers of people with poor health and pre-existing conditions and older people enrolling, whereas younger and healthier people remained outside the system. And that was the fatal flaw in the construction of the Affordable Care Act. You have an unbalanced pool. For something like auto insurance, which is compulsory, everybody's in the pool.
Right.
For something like workers' compensation coverage, which covers you for injuries on the job, literally every employer in the state is in the pool. There are no exceptions. But with the Affordable Care Act, the sick signed up disproportionately. They all received subsidies, very extensive subsidies, generally speaking, and the younger and healthier individuals remained outside.
Robert Hartwig, thank you so much for being with us. There's still so much we didn't even touch upon. I'd love to have you come back, and especially talking about Trump's presidency on the local and global markets.
I'd be very happy to, Megan.
Thank you so much. Still to come on Awareness, what will a repeal do to the thousands in South Carolina who are already insured? And what about the impact on hospitals? That's next on Awareness. Welcome back to Awareness. Since Congress has started to repeal the ACA, rallies have been happening across the country, including right here in South Carolina. The goal has been to gain momentum and fight the GOP from dismantling it altogether. Caroline Patricus spoke with some protesters in front of the governor's mansion who are in fear of losing their health care.
This was the scene across much of the country.
To filibuster and shut down the U.S. Senate. If they want,
thousands of Democrats gathered at dozens of rallies fighting the Republicans' efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
It was good to see so many people here.
Families, lawyers, and students among dozens who gathered in front of the governor's mansion on Sunday, expressing concerns.
Fix it. Take the time to fix it. Don't take it away.
Right now, I'm not on the ACA, but I have family members and friends that could die if the ACA is repealed.
I'm here because my brother was born with a pre-existing condition, and I just feel like I'm a little concerned about repealing the Affordable Care Act.
And among dozens of others chanting, holding signs, Jamie Harrison, chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, who's also making a push to become the chair of the National DNC, called for more people to take a stand.
Filibuster and don't allow anything to happen. We have to shut it down to prove to the senators, to prove to the members of Congress that we are not going to stand for this.
In Columbia, Caroline Patricus, WIS News 10.
Joining us now to talk about the impact of repealing the Affordable Care Act here in South Carolina, we have Rosalind Goodwin with the South Carolina Hospital Association and Sue Berkowitz with the Appleseed Legal Justice Center. Thank you ladies so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having us.
More than 212,000 South Carolinians signing up for affordable care here in the state. Why is this such a big number, and why is this so important?
And that's just so far. We always expect a big rush toward the end of open enrollment. And that open enrollment period, of course, is a couple of weeks from us. So we'll certainly have more than 212,000. But there are certainly people who are seeking that financial security that comes with health care coverage and insurance. And even in light of the discussion of repeal and replace, people are really trying to take advantage of the assistance that they can get right now for affordable health care.
And Sue, what are you hearing from people who are concerned about this repeal process?
Well, the big concern is that just by repealing without having a real replacement in place means that there's going to be real chaos in the market. In fact, there's a real concern that if it's just repealed and we have nothing in place going forward, that the costs to our healthcare economy and our healthcare systems are going to skyrocket, and that in fact we're not going to see people holding on to their insurance after this year, that we're going to see insurance companies bailing immediately, because just like people want predictability in how they're going to get their coverage, insurance companies are just that. They're businesses. They're out to make a huge profit, and if there's no certainty as to what's going to happen with a program going forward, they're going to bail. And what we're going to find is the 212,000 people that we see need coverage now and are happy to get that coverage are also going to find themselves without insurance.
And Rosalind, from a hospital perspective, what are some of the concerns with this repeal process?
Well, hospitals across South Carolina and the nation have been preparing and implementing changes to improve our healthcare system since the Affordable Care Act passed. A lot has been invested in technology and billing, and all of our systems have changed to adapt to the Affordable Care Act. Repealing that, of course, leaves a lot of uncertainty. I heard someone say the other day, and I said I would quote it, that the only thing worse than bad policy is uncertainty. And particularly for our hospitals, that is the case, and more in particular are for our small and rural hospitals. I was just visiting one of those the other day. they don't have 2 months or 2 years or 4 years to try to figure out what the replacement will be. They're month to month.
Right, it's right now.
It's right now. And all of this uncertainty with all the changes they've already made to implement the Affordable Care Act is a nerve-wracking issue for executives and the communities of those small and rural hospitals and the patients that they serve who have been able to get access because they have health insurance now. And it will be detrimental to the vitality of that hospital if that coverage and that access goes away for the community.
Right.
And we have to remember that the act was signed into law on March 23rd, 2010. The actual healthcare.gov actually allowing people to enroll wasn't until 2014. And so why? Because it took those 4 years to slowly implement that, to make sure, and even with that, there were a few glitches. We understand that. But it takes time to implement. We know that there's so many things. We were able to do it in stages. For example, people with pre-existing conditions, it's not just whether or not people pay more for pre-existing conditions, it's that people were barred from ever getting insurance because they had the audacity of being ill, and therefore they weren't going to be able to get insurance. For people who are older, and maybe I take it a little personally now, but it's going to happen to all of us, if it's 10 times more, that makes a huge difference. If your sex, your gender, it meant you might pay 3 times more. The reason we have the pooling of everybody in this is because we want to even out. Yes, very sick people and people who had not been insured and had health care problems were the first to enroll. Well, that's a no-brainer. We know why that happened. And if we had had the opportunity to do the tweaks that needed to be done, no law of that magnitude can be perfect when it's initially enacted, but when the only efforts were to repeal, and no real opportunity to have negotiations on what can we do to tweak and make sure this is going to work, we're going to be right back into that chaos again.
Well, ladies, we're going to take a quick break and come back and continue our conversation. You can still enroll until January 31st. Go to healthcare.gov, or you can call the number on your screen, 1-800-318-2596. More on the impact of the ACA here in South Carolina after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Awareness. Many of the nearly 20 million Americans who've gotten coverage under the Affordable Care Act are worried about what comes next, including those who voted for Donald Trump, who on the campaign trail vowed to repeal the ACA.
The hardest part is getting the needle in.
Dee Dee Ward lives in the heart of Trump country, rural Tennessee, where she's battling cancer. Without the Affordable Care Act, she doesn't know how she'd pay for her chemotherapy.
What do? Do you say, I can't afford it, I have no money, and you just stay home and wait to die?
68% of voters in Murray County backed Donald Trump, who's pledged to repeal and replace Obamacare.
This provides Congress with the legislative tools that we need.
But replacing the law takes 60 votes, so they'll need to compromise with Democrats because there are only 52 Republicans. First, Republicans need a plan because they don't have one. Is Congress moving too fast?
I don't think many of us expected to be in this position.
Suddenly, Republicans from red states are sounding the alarm.
There's been a lot of harm, a lot of damage created by this health care law. We need to focus on fixing that first, not pull the rug out from anybody.
And back in Murray, Tennessee,
as I'm enrolling patients or re-enrolling patients, they're asking, what am I going to do in a couple of months when all this goes away? And I really don't have any answers for them.
It's all putting intense pressure on the incoming administration. People like Dee Dee Ward pleading with members of Congress not to leave her behind.
Try to see it not from your high pedestal that you're on. Try to see it from the people down here.
Let's continue our conversation now about the local impact of repealing the ACA with Rosalind Goodwin and Sue Berkowitz. So, proposed changes possibly to Medicare and Medicaid with some potentially negative consequences. Let's talk about some of those.
Certainly. We don't know exactly what replace will be. There's a lot of discussion about it, but what we can look at are some of the plans that have been put out. A Better Way by Speaker Paul Ryan proposes increasing the Medicare eligibility age by 2 years. Also replacing our existing Medicaid structure that's very generous in granting South Carolina 70 cents on every 30 cents we put up. Changing that to a block grant or per capita formula or format that could certainly reduce the dollars that come into the state of South Carolina for our poor and working poor. So there are great concerns about what the replacement will be for hospitals.
And Sue, did you want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, I mean, especially for the Medicaid program, when we're talking about a block grant, we really are talking about capping the amount of money that could come to the state of South Carolina. The beauty of the Medicaid program is that it responds to the economy. And while we do have a very generous match, we have, it also responds to, when we had a recession, we saw our rolls greatly increase, and that's because people found themselves without employment, they found their kids without insurance, themselves without insurance. We have a block grant, that's it, that's the amount of money, and then the state of South Carolina is going to have to find a way to pay for providing insurance to these folk, and I don't think that the state during those times is going to have the ability to do that.
Well, as we wait to see exactly what happens and how everything shakes out, this is a conversation that will continue, but I thank you both for now for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with the final thought. Governor Nikki Haley is one step closer to becoming the next UN ambassador. She went before a Senate panel to speak and answer questions on her nomination. She was introduced at the hearing by South Carolina Senators Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott. Haley was tapped for that position at the end of last year. As Governor Haley continues on her path, and as a nation as we begin new leadership, we want to talk about it on Awareness. What are your concerns? We want to hear from you. Join our conversation on our Awareness Facebook page. And as for healthcare, you can still enroll. You still have time until January 31st. Go to healthcare.gov, or you can call 1-800-318-2596. Until next time, I'm Megan Norman. This is Awareness.